All I can say to start this off with is I'm one of the very few lucky people in the upper 5% who went on a mission, and when he came back, his girlfriend was waiting for him. And I consider that as one of the greatest blessings and achievements of my entire life. Well, I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I wanted to devote more time to that later. But I would like to mention a few things. We had been dating for 7.5 years. And you can imagine the feeling that I had coming back. And I had to take the slow ship between Southampton and New York City. Then on to the train. Train goes to Chicago. Get in Chicago. We're assigned seats. So I go to my assigned seat, and sitting there next to me is Elder Spencer W. Kimball. And I was stunned by that. I introduced myself, told him that when I was laboring in Ireland, he appeared as part of his duty to view the mission, spoke to the members of the church in Ireland. We had 6 missionaries, and I can remember him very well. They had rented a hall for him. The hall, in my opinion, was extremely meager, but it's all that they could get, and he spoke to us. Then we were interviewed, each missionary, by him. That was kind of a terrifying experience, but it was a very inspiring experience. But he was right to the point and wanted to know exactly what I was doing, how hard I was working, and how deeply committed I was. And there was no messing around with him. So now I am sitting next to him, and he's reading a book. And the book is the life of Alexander the Great. And he said, you know, someday I hope and pray that I can have a world of my own. And I'm reading this book on Alexander the Great because what he achieved as such a young man in a 10-year span is unequaled in the history of the world. And he was right about that. So I wanted to learn how he approached life and how he approached things. Well, that kind of got me interested in Alexander the Great. But we didn't talk about Alexander the Great. We talked about missionary work. We talked about life. We talked about marriage. We talked about a lot of things. But one thing that I observed from Alexander the Great on my own was that as a young man at 13, considered the most intelligent man and learned man in the world was Aristotle. Alexander's father in Macedonia, the king of Macedonia, Philip II, hired Aristotle to come to the capital of Macedonia and spend 3 years with his son, Alexander, and teach him about life. So Alexander probably, in antiquity, was the most educated person ever to take the helm of a nation. Now, I don't want to spend time on Alexander the Great, but it was unbelievable what he accomplished. So now I'm back with Elder Spencer W. Kimball. And there's many things I can say, but I want to just focus on one thing mainly. He said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" And I said, "Yes. And she'll be waiting for me when the train arrives in Salt Lake City." He made this statement. He says, "I have come to the conclusion that basically if you love the woman, that the idea of having a soulmate is fictitious. There are a few people who get married and the husband and the wife are soulmates, but very few indeed. So what it boils down to is having to work it out and stick it out and make it work. I believe this. The number one responsibility is the man's. And in that context, his responsibility is to live true to his priesthood obligations and to fulfill his assignments in the church and to set an example and preside as a father over the family. To take his leadership role seriously and be a compassionate, loving, but idealistic and hard-working leader. And number one in his life has got to be that priesthood, or that marriage is going to crumble in many cases. And I've seen so many cases that it's just simply pathetic. So it doesn't make much difference who you marry if you fulfill your priesthood responsibilities. Now, when he said that to me, I said to myself, well, that probably is true with a lot of people, but not with me. I take everything serious, what he said, except one thing. There's only one girl for me, and that's Carol. And I will fulfill my priesthood responsibilities at the best of my ability. But there's no one could take her place. It has to be Carol, and Carol only. Well, what happened was we get together, and it is quite a blissful reunion, and one that we waited both for a little over 2 years. And we decided maybe we ought to get married. But then Carol got scared. And I couldn't figure it out. And I was looking back, I now know exactly what happened. Carol did not want all of the involvement of a typical marriage where you have these receptions and you have this and you have that. You send out all of these notifications or whatever you want to call it to all the friends, and you're standing in line after your marriage, shaking hands with people that you don't even want to see, because what you really want is just to be together with your mate. So there's all this formality, which most of it in Carol's mind was simply a bunch of baloney. Now, her older sister got married, and I'm telling you, there was very few examples that transcend that in Idaho Falls, and the formality of that marriage and all the people that came. And I remember that I came to that, and I saw all these people, and it was overwhelming. And in those days, how I could ever do that? I stutter. How could I even talk to these people if I was standing in a line like that? Oh, my goodness gracious. And but she never mentioned that. But looking back, that was the problem. Now, she was studying to be a registered nurse. She had about 6 months to go, maybe a little more, maybe 8. But part of that was 3 months in Los Angeles at a children's primary hospital. And she felt that what we ought to do, and she had to leave right at the very first of the year and go on down. When I got back, when I arrived in Salt Lake City, we're talking about the very first part of November. So she was going to leave and go down the very, very last part of December in order to be ready to start the first part of January. So we talked about this, and I said, well, what I would recommend is we get married, and then I can come on down, I can get a job, I can do a lot of things. Now, I had income coming from billboards that I had done and built before my mission. So I didn't have a lot, but I had enough to get by. So I didn't have to rely upon parents, which if I did on mine, they'd say no. And I would never rely on hers because my pride would not permit me to do that. So That was the situation I was in. So I believed we could get married. And she didn't know that would mean up in Idle Falls. So again, she saw all this formality that would be part of the marriage. She didn't say that to me, but I know her so well. Now, we said goodbye. I told her, Carol, this is a mistake. I'm going to BYU. And deep down, I was upset. I was really upset. I said, I'm going to go down there, and I'm going to start dating. That's what I said to myself. So I was packing, and right at the very last part of December, the phone rings. This was on a Sunday night. It's Carol. She said, Doug, I've changed my mind. Will you come down and marry me? And I said, no. You had your opportunity. I waited 7.5 years. You were playing games with me. No. Click. I was really upset. But, so I'm still packing. About 10 minutes later, the phone rings again. Doug, will you come down and marry me? I said, Carol, I've already told you no, and I mean it. I'm sorry. No. Click. So my mother said, that soft dog, she'll forget about it by tomorrow morning. I'll never forget that. I said, it hit me. Well, she's not a soft dog, but she's not going to forget it by tomorrow morning. I can tell you that for sure. But anyway, so the phone rings a third time. And she said, Doug, please, please. The time is ripe and right now. Come on down and marry me. And it seemed like an amazing phenomenon. In just a matter of like a second or two, it seemed like the entire relationship, from when I first saw her when I was 13 in the 8th grade, and the first date when I was 15 as a sophomore, and all that had happened, and what we had done together, cheerleaders together, everything, it just all went through in a flash. And I said, Doug, you're never going to walk away from that. You know that. So I said, I'll come. Well, she didn't have a temple recommend, and I had one. She's in California. So the next day I go to her father, tell him what had happened. I'm going down, and I'm hopeful that he would give me his blessings to do so. And he was very eager to do that. He was one of the probably 3 or 4 most important men of my life. I looked up to him in all aspects. And Carol really takes on his personality. Looks like her mother, but she takes on the attitude and aptitude of her father. And he's really a giant of a man. Well, I said, well, gosh, we don't have a temple recommend for Carol. But I can tell you right now, she's worthy. He says, I know that. So he went to the bishop. He signed one. Took it to the stake president, Cecil Hart. He signed it. I got it the next day. And so my father came to me. I didn't have any transportation. I'm going to get there. I don't know. I didn't know. He said, Doug, I'm going to loan you my car. It was one of the last Packards made in the United States. But it was a beautiful car. And he says, here's $75 for gasoline. You can borrow my car while you're there, because you're going to be gone for about 3 months. He said, I got a pickup. We can drive the pickup. We'll get by.